All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep on the theories of this guy, Emmanuel Todd.
Oh, yeah, Emmanuel Todd.
And let me tell you,
Hmm.
his ideas are pretty wild.
They're fascinating.
We're talking about how family structures, like the ones we grew up in, the ones we see all around us, can actually explain huge historical shifts, like revolutions, wars, you name it.
And shape national
Oh,
identities.
yeah.
And even, get this, predict global power plays.
Yeah.
You know, who's going to be top dog on the world stage, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so how about
Yeah,
we, yeah, so how about we just jump right in?
let's do it.
So basically, just to lay it all out, we're looking at this YouTube video interview with Emmanuel Todd.
Right, a French anthropologist, demographer, historian, and to top it all off, a perspectivist.
Perspectivist, what's that like? Someone who can see into the future?
Sort of. It means he studies long-term trends and tries to anticipate how things might unfold in the future. But the cool thing is he doesn't use a crystal ball. He uses data and analysis.
So he's like a data-driven fortune teller. I like it.
You could say that. But seriously, Todd's work is really about connecting the dots between those little everyday things, like how families function, and the big picture stuff, like global politics.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I gotta be honest, it still sounds a little far out there. Like, how can my messy family dynamics explain, say, the rise of China as a superpower?
Well, Todd's not saying your personal family drama is directly responsible for China's rise, obviously. His theory is more about the deep-rooted values embedded in different family structures. He says that these values, the ones we inherit from our parents, grandparents, they get passed down for generations, and they end up shaping individual behavior, like how we think, how we interact with each other.
And then that ripples outward.
Exactly. And it shapes entire societies, everything from our economic systems to our political ideologies. Todd says it's all connected back to those basic family units. It's like a cultural DNA. But instead of genes, it's family dynamics that get passed down.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection. So it's like different families have different operating systems, and those systems influence how their societies run.
That's a great way to put it. And just like with computer operating systems, there are variations, right? Well, Todd identifies four main family types, each with its own distinct set of values, like code, that shapes how a society functions.
All right, I'm on the edge of my seat. Lay it on me. What are these four family types, and how do they explain, well, everything?
Okay, so first up, we have the nuclear egalitarian family. This is the kind of family where all the kids inherit equally, and it's super common in France.
France, huh? Land of love, revolution, and equal inheritance. I'm sensing a pattern here.
You got it. Todd argues that this emphasis on egalitarianism, baked right into the family structure, is a major driving force behind France's revolutionary history and its love of robust social safety nets.
So basically, if everyone in the family gets an equal slice of the pie, then they expect the same fairness in society.
Exactly. It's about those values being projected from the family unit onto the national stage.
Okay, that makes sense for France. But isn't it a bit simplistic to say that inheritance laws are directly responsible for, the storming of the Bastille?
Right. Todd wouldn't say it's a direct cause and effect thing, but more like a contributing factor. He says those deep-seated values create a kind of cultural predisposition, like fertile ground for certain ideas to take root and flourish. It's about understanding the underlying currents that shape a nation's direction.
Okay, so if France is all about equality, what about other parts of the world? Let's talk about us, the US, the UK, the whole Anglosphere. What kind of family structure are we rocking?
Todd calls it the nuclear absolute family. And here it's all about individual freedom. Kids don't necessarily inherit equally, it's up to the parents. So freedom of inheritance is king, which puts a premium on individual liberty, sometimes even over strict equality.
Ah, the American dream in a nutshell. Work hard, make your fortune, leave it all to your favorite goldfish if you want.
Exactly. And this explains a lot about the historical emphasis on things like liberalism, free markets, that kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
in the Anglosphere.
But hold on, wouldn't that also lead to, well, more inequality? If it's all about individual success, someone's got to lose, right?
You're hitting on a key point that Todd makes. He says this nuclear absolute structure, while it might encourage innovation and economic growth, it can also lead to social fragmentation, maybe even what he calls nihilism, a sense of, like, meaninglessness. Like, what's the point of it all if it's just about me, myself, and I?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like, if everyone's just out for themselves, how do you build a strong, cohesive society?
Right, and Todd sees a lot of the issues we face in the West, like the rise of individualism, people feeling isolated, maybe even stuff like the opioid crisis.
Mm.
He sees those as symptoms of a society that values individual freedom maybe a bit too much at the cost of the collective good.
Wow, that's some serious food for thought. So we've got France, with its equality-driven families, and the Anglosphere, with its freedom-loving clans. What other family models are out there shaping the world?
Let's head over to Germany and Japan, where the STEM family reigns supreme.
STEM family. Okay, I'm all ears.
In this system, only one child inherits, typically the eldest son. It's all about maintaining order, continuity, tradition. Like, think of those classic family businesses passed down through the generations.
So very hierarchical, very traditional.
You nailed it. And Todd argues that this emphasis on authority and clear lines of succession translates into a culture that values discipline, respects authority, and is super efficient, especially when it comes to economic and technological stuff.
Okay, so STEM families, well-oiled machines. But isn't there a downside to all this order and hierarchy?
You're sharp. Todd says there's a flip side. This respect for authority, it can make these societies vulnerable to, well, authoritarianism. He points to Germany's history with Nazism as an example.
Oof, yeah, that's a sobering thought. So it's like this double-edged sword. The same values that can lead to incredible achievements can also create blind spots, vulnerabilities.
Exactly. It's all about context. And that brings us to our final family type, the communitarian family.
Okay, hit me with it. What makes these families tick?
This one's a bit of a wild card. It's commonly found in places like Russia, China, some parts of Eastern Europe. And it's kind of hard to categorize because it blends both egalitarian and authoritarian elements.
Wait, both? How does that even work?
Think of it like this. All the sons inherit equally, so there's that sense of horizontal equality, right? But they all still answer to the big man, the patriarch. So there's this strong vertical authority as well.
So it's like a brotherhood ruled by a powerful father figure.
Precisely. And Todd thinks this helps explain a lot about those societies, why they tend to have a history of both strongman leaders and a strong sense of community.
So from the czars to the Communist Party, it's all connected back to this family dynamic.
You got it. Todd sees this communitarian family structure as key to understanding those countries' complex relationship with power and authority.
Mind blown. Okay, so we've got these four family types, each shaping societies in their own way. But does Todd only focus on Europe? What about the rest of the world?
Oh, he goes way beyond Europe. In fact, some of his most interesting insights come from applying this framework to cultures that are, well, pretty different from the West. For example, he spends a lot of time analyzing the Arab world.
Oh, really? What does he have to say about that part of the world?
Well, he starts by digging into this concept called endogamy.
Endogamy. Remind me what that is again.
It basically means marriage among cousins, which is pretty common in many Arab societies.
Oh, right. So he's looking at how marriage patterns fit into this whole family structure theory.
Exactly. And he says that, in the West, we tend to view marriage through the lens of romantic love, individual choice, all that. But in these societies, it's less about love and more about strengthening those family and tribal bonds, preserving social cohesion. It's a different logic.
Right. It's like a whole different operating system for relationships and families. And how does that connect to the political side of things?
Todd says this focus on the collective, on the group, it makes it really hard for, say, Western-style democracy to take root because those systems are all about individual rights, individual choice. It's a fundamental difference in values.
So trying to impose our way of doing things might not be the best approach.
That's a major point Todd makes. He says those attempts often backfire because they fail to understand the deep cultural logic of these societies. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, you can't force everyone to play by the same rules, can you? But hold on, are we saying that all cultural values are equally valid? Even the ones that might seem, harmful or oppressive?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll definitely unpack more as we go deeper into Todd's work. But I think the key takeaway for now is that understanding these different values, different cultural logics, it's essential for navigating this increasingly interconnected world we live in. We can't just assume everyone thinks the same way we do.
Okay, point taken. It's about understanding, not judging. But we've only scratched the surface of Todd's theories, and I'm dying to know more. We'll be back after a short break to continue this deep dive where we'll explore his thoughts on education, religion, and even his predictions for the future. Okay, so we're back, and my brain is still buzzing from that last segment, trying to wrap my head around all these family structures and how they shape the world.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, I'm starting to see things in a whole new light, like every family gathering is suddenly a microcosm of global politics. It's kind of freaky.
It's funny you should say that because one of the things that really struck me about Todd's work is this idea that these family-based values, they don't just shape individual societies, they actually influence how cultures interact with each other on a global scale.
Right, like that whole clash of civilizations thing people talk about.
Exactly. Todd argues that a lot of the conflict and misunderstanding we see in the world today, it stems from this clash between different cultural logics, different ways of seeing the world, and those logics, they often go right back to those fundamental family structures we were talking about.
Okay, so it's like trying to explain the concept of personal space to someone who grew up in a culture where everyone's always up in each other's business. Total communication breakdown.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that's why Todd's work is so important. It gives us a framework for understanding those differences, a way to decode those cultural signals.
So it's not just about being polite, it's about like diplomacy, international relations, even avoiding wars.
Exactly. Todd's saying we need to move beyond this one-size-fits-all approach to global affairs.
Hmm.
The idea that everyone should just adopt Western values and everything will be hunky-dory.
Right, because history has shown us that that doesn't really work out so well.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And Todd argues that it's not even about saying one system is better than another. It's about recognizing that different cultures have different strengths, different weaknesses, different ways of solving problems.
Okay. I'm all for cultural sensitivity and all that, but isn't there a risk of like relativism here? Are
Mhm.
we saying that all values are equally valid, even the ones that might seem, kind of messed up to us?
That's a really important point, and it's something that Todd grapples with directly in his work. He's not saying we should just blindly accept everything, but he is saying that we need to try to understand the logic behind those practices, the historical and social context that led to their development.
So it's about trying to see the world through their eyes, even if we don't necessarily agree with everything they do.
Exactly, and that's tough, right? It requires us to step outside of our own comfort zones, our own cultural biases.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like trying to learn a whole new language, but instead of words, it's values and beliefs.
But Todd argues that it's essential if we want to build a more peaceful and cooperative world, a world where different cultures can coexist and thrive.
Okay, I'm on board with that. But let's be real. We live in a world where power dynamics and self-interest often trump cultural understanding. Does Todd acknowledge that?
Oh, absolutely. He's not naive. He knows the world is a messy place, but he believes that by recognizing the influence of these family structures, we can at least start to navigate those complexities with a bit more awareness and sensitivity.
So it's about having a more nuanced approach to diplomacy, understanding that different cultures might have very different ideas about what a fair solution looks like.
Exactly. And this brings us to another key concept in Todd's work, this idea of cultural inertia.
Oh, yeah, that's the one where cultures tend to change slowly, even in the face of massive upheaval, kind of like a giant ship trying to turn around. It takes a while.
Exactly. And Todd uses this concept to explain why some societies are more resistant to change than others, why those attempts to, like, impose democracy or capitalism from the outside often fail to take root.
It's like trying to plant a cactus in a rainforest. The environment just isn't right.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of the most fascinating and maybe even a little bit scary aspects of Todd's work, his predictions about the future.
Oh, really? I'm all ears. What does our family structure forecasting guru have to say about what's coming down the pike?
Well, that's a conversation for our next segment, but let's just say he doesn't sugarcoat things.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. You're killing me. I guess I'll have to wait with bated breath to hear what kind of wild future he's predicting based on all this family stuff.
Well, it's not all doom and gloom. There's also a lot of hope and possibility in Todd's vision.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in part 3.
All right, fine. You've convinced me. I'll be back after the break to hear the grand finale of our Emmanuel Todd deep dive. But in the meantime, listeners, I encourage you to take a look at your own family, maybe even draw out a family tree. You might be surprised at what you discover about yourself and about the world. Okay, so we're back, and I gotta say, I'm a little nervous about this whole predictions for the future thing.
Yeah, Todd doesn't exactly paint a rosy picture.
I mean, we've talked about how these different family structures are like clashing cultural tectonic plates, shaping the world in all these profound ways.
Right, and it seems like things are getting pretty shaky these days.
Yeah, no kidding. So spill the beans. What does Todd see happening? Is it World War III, a global pandemic, a zombie apocalypse?
Well, thankfully, he doesn't go that far, but he is pretty concerned about the direction things are headed.
Okay, I'm bracing myself. Give it to me straight.
Todd sees this current period of instability, with all the political polarization, economic uncertainty, those rising tensions between the West and, say, China and Russia.
Yeah, yeah.
He sees it as kind of a necessary but painful stage in the evolution of human societies.
So it's like we're all going through a collective awkward teenage phase.
Exactly. We're all trying to figure out who we are in this rapidly changing world, all these different cultures bumping up against each other.
Right, but some of us are dealing with it by like slamming doors and blasting angsty music, and others are starting wars.
That's a good way to put it. There's definitely a lot of tension and conflict brewing.
Okay, so the short-term forecast is pretty bleak, but what about the long game? Does Todd see any hope for the future?
He does, actually. He believes that out of all this chaos, a new equilibrium will eventually emerge.
Really? A new world order based on what? Family therapy?
Haha, not quite. But he does think that understanding these family structures is key to navigating this transition.
Okay, so what does that new world order look like? Everyone sitting around a giant campfire, singing Kumbaya and sharing inheritance stories?
Not exactly, but he envisions a world where different cultures can coexist, respect each other's values, even learn from each other.
So it's not about erasing differences, but about finding a way to make them work.
Exactly. And that's not going to be easy. It's going to require a lot of effort, a lot of understanding, a lot of compromise.
And maybe a whole lot of therapy.
Maybe. But Todd believes it's possible. And he sees these family structures as a roadmap, a way to understand where each culture is coming from and how we can bridge those divides.
Okay, so where do we even start? How do we get from this current mess to this harmonious future?
Todd's answer is surprisingly simple. Education, understanding, dialogue.
It sounds so easy when you say it like that.
It's not easy at all.
Yeah.
It's probably the hardest thing we can do as humans, but it's absolutely essential if we want to create a world where everyone can thrive.
Wow, this has been an incredible journey, a real mind bender. I've learned so much, and I'm honestly a little overwhelmed.
I know it's a lot to take in, but I think the main takeaway is that we need to start paying more attention to these family structures. They're not just private matters, they're the building blocks of our societies, of our world.
Well said. And on that note, dear listeners, we encourage you to go out there, explore these ideas, look at your own families, look at the world around you with fresh eyes, and most importantly, keep those conversations going, because that's how we build bridges, that's how we create a better future.
Absolutely.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.